All right, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of the MakeCode Arcade Advanced stream. I'm Richard at Richard on the MakeCode forum.
I'm Daryl at Darzu on the forum.
I'm Joey at JWonderl on the forum.
I'm Shannon at Shakao on the forum.
And what are we gonna do this week, guys? Or actually, I know what we're gonna do this week, but does someone else want to say it?
Boss Rush. Gotta
Right.
make a bunch of boss games.
So we had so much fun doing boss fights last week that this time we're going to do a series of connected boss fights, and then we're going to string them all together as a boss rush, which is where is a mode that you find in games typically where you battle all of the bosses at once. So another thing we're doing today that's a little bit different is we have some starter code already on the canvas, and if whoever was going to could post the link in the chat. I think Joey is. Okay, cool. So Joey has posted a link in the Mixer chat to this starter code, but this is code that we've written a few different times on stream, so we're just not going to code it again, but I'll go over it real quick. It's just the basic stuff for the starting of a platformer. So let's go through it real quick. First thing we're doing is setting a tile map. If we open up this tile map, you can see I've got ground and transparency, and I've turned all of the green tiles to be walls. So if I turn that on and off, you can see. All right. Now I'm defining the gravity, which is in pixels per second. I'm setting it to 300. The jump height, which is how many pixels my character can jump. As you can see, it's 32, which is 2 tiles high. I'm also setting the player's speed, just in case we want to tweak it later. That's the speed for horizontal. This is me calculating the jump velocity. It's the square root of 2 times the gravity times the jump height. You just need to know that equation. It's not important to know why it works. And then I'm defining the player, setting the gravity, setting move with the VY0 so that I can't move up and down. And then on A button pressed, if the player is hitting a wall on the bottom, so it's on the ground, then we want to set the velocity to the jump velocity, which is the jump part of the code. All right, cool.
Looks great.
So you may have noticed I've left some placeholder art here. But I think we might actually be going with this minimal blocky style for most of the games that we're going to be doing this week. But we've been having some trouble thinking up some themes, some connecting themes, the connecting thread between these games. So if you have any ideas, please post them in the chat. Okay, so I've done a little bit thinking about how I want this game to play out. And the basic idea is I really am a fan of Metroidvania type games. Games where you run around and you have a blaster, or you're in a spooky castle and you have a whip, and you can fire in whatever direction you're currently facing, and we're gonna fire projectiles. So the idea is we only have the D-pad for choosing directions. So whichever direction I last moved in, so either right or left, when I press the B button, I'll start firing in that direction. And I'm just gonna be firing a bunch of different projectiles. And for our boss, the boss is going to appear over here on the right. And I have some ideas for what the behavior is, but let's get to that once I've done this kind of running and firing mechanic.
I think it might be helpful to give your player character like an eye or something that's like slightly directional so that we know what way they're facing, just so that there's some like visual indicator.
I think it's pretty clear once you start firing.
Okay, that's fair.
If that's a problem and it feels weird while I'm playing it, we can totally go back and make that change. All right, so first things first, I want to fire when I press the B button. A button is already used for jumping. So I'm going to go ahead and drag out a game update block. So I could use the controller on B pressed, but I also want to have the behavior where if you hold down B, it'll keep firing. So we've shown a few different ways to do that on stream, but my personal favorite way is to just use an on-game update and a timer. And it makes it easy to keep track of where you are and just make it so you can continuously fire at the same rate. So I'm going to drag out an on-game update. And I'm going to put in a logic block, put in an if, and I'm going to go into the controller and drag out an is button pressed. And I'll change that to B. So right now this doesn't do anything. Let's go ahead and start making our projectiles. So I'm going to go into sprites and drag out our favorite create projectile block. I'm using the one from my sprite instead of from side because we're going to be firing it from the player. So let's go ahead and drag that out. For the art, I don't want these projectiles to be 16 by 16. That's a little too big. So let's take it down to 4 by 4 and see how that looks. And like I said, we're not getting fancy on art this week. So it's just going to be a white square. So you see I have a little warning here. That's because I haven't changed this variable dropdown. Once I change it from my sprite to the player, it'll go away. All right. Now if I hold down B, we should see a bunch of projectiles.
That's a lot of projectiles.
Yeah, so this is fun. The reason it looks like basically a continuous line is because I'm creating one on every frame, which means I'm creating a ton. But before we fix that, I'm first going to fix these velocity arguments. So if we remember, the mechanics for my game are going to be whichever direction I was last facing, that's the direction we want to fire. And we're not going to fire up or down. We're only going to fire left or right. So I'm going to go ahead and set Vy to 0 for now. And now it should be firing to the right because that's the positive x, which is kind of fun. Now we need to keep track of which direction was the last one I was going in. So we could, in here, just see if our velocity is positive or negative and then go based off of that. But that's going to have a problem, which is which direction will I be firing in when I'm not moving? So typically in these games, it's best to just remember which direction was the last one we were firing in and just keep going with that. So I'm going to be creating a variable here that's going to keep track of that state. And I'm going to call it is facing left. If I had a nickel for every time I made a variable called is facing left, I'd have like a few dollars. All right, and this is going to start out as false. Doesn't really matter what it starts out with, but I want to make sure that it's a Boolean, and I want to have the code in my project that's indicating which way it's going. And actually, is facing left is probably good to start out false because that means if we just press the B button, we'll start firing to the right. Okay. So I'm going to stick with the style of coding I've been doing before. And right now I just have this 50 down here. But it's nicer to keep all of these things in variables up here. The reason why is because I might want to change these values later if they don't feel right or if they feel a little too easy or too hard. And this makes it so I can just go to one place in my code, the on start, and tweak all of those values without having to remember, oh, where did I use the velocity? Where did I create the projectile and all of those things? So I'm going to create another variable, and this is going to be projectile velocity. And let's see. 50 seems a little slow. Do you think? Should we maybe try 100?
Yeah, 150 maybe.
Yeah, we'll leave it like that, and we'll try out some values. 100 might be a little too small. I think Joey's right. Okay, so let's go ahead and switch this code so that we're using the projectile velocity in the VX. And now it's faster. Yeah, I'm going to make it a little higher. So we'll do 150. Cool.
It's making about one projectile every 30 milliseconds right now, so that's quite a few.
Yeah, more than we need. Okay, so let's go ahead and put in the logic for my is facing left. So I'm going to drag out another if statement, and I want this to update on every frame. So I'm just going to put it inside of the same on-game update, but before this is B button pressed, so that I can use this variable down here, and it'll already be set from up here. And so I could just set this to be an expression, but like I said, I only want to set it if the velocity is actually positive or actually negative. If the velocity is 0, I want it to stay the same as the previous value. So I'm going to be using an if statement to make that kind of reality. So I'm going to drag, I'm going to create another else if. I'm going to get rid of this else because I don't need it. Okay, let me drag out a comparison block from the logic section. And I need to get the sprite VX. So I'm going to change this to the player. Going to change x to be vx. And I'll leave that as less than 0. Okay. So if the player's velocity is less than 0, that means we're going in the negative direction, which, even though my camera is reversed, means we're going left. So yeah, pretended I point it in the right direction. I did from my perspective. So I'm going to just duplicate this set is facing left, and I'll put it in here, and I'll change this false to be true. Now for this second case, we're going to be using basically the same check, except we're going to change the less than to be a greater than. So now if it's greater than 0, that means we're heading to the right. So we can set this is facing left to be false. All right, and my code has not changed. Well, my gameplay has not changed. My code has. All right, so let's actually use this facing left now. And I'm going to create another if statement. And I'll create an else. And we're going to do if we are facing left. So there it is. These are alphabetized, but every single time I try to go to a variable, I forget that fact. So we're going to set the projectile in both of these places. If we are facing left, that means we want to be firing to the left. So that'll be in the negative direction. So I want to take my projectile velocity and make it negative. And the easiest way to do that is to go into math, drag out a subtraction, and it's 0 minus the velocity. That'll make it negative. OK, let's test this out. Now if I'm holding B, it starts out going to the right. If I move to the left, now I'm firing to the left. And if I, swap around this. And I really like how all these projectiles overlapping looks. I don't think it would run very well on hardware, but we can, maybe we should do a game that uses this in the future. That seems kind of fun. I don't know if you guys
like firefighting or something.
Yeah, I don't know if it's coming over so well, but it looks very smooth on my screen. Okay. But we don't want to do this right now. I think we want to fire at a much slower rate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a timer to keep track of this. So there's a really easy way to time things in your game, and it uses a block that's in the game category, and it's called time since start milliseconds. So what this gives me is the time since the game started. So if I were to just do our favorite way of printing stuff out on the screen and have the players say the time since start every frame, let me drag out a join so I can put a number in there. That, get rid of the world. There you go. So now our player's just going to constantly say the time. So you can see this is just constantly going up. Every single time we hit a second, it's going to change this thousandth place because these are milliseconds, not seconds. And I'm going to use this value to keep track of how much time has run in between each of these frames. So this isn't guaranteed to always be the same amount of time. That's why I'm using this time since start. And it'll make it easier for us to keep track of these values. OK. So I'm going to create another variable, and this is going to be called last fire time. And this is going to be set to the last time where we created a projectile. So right now, I'm just going to put it down here at the bottom because we want it to run for both cases of this if statement. So I'm just going to put this after that. And I'm going to get rid of this say block. It has done its purpose. I'll put it on the side just in case I want to say something else later. And I'm going to set the last fire time to be the time since start in milliseconds. And basic idea is I'm going to compare the time since start to the last fire time and see if enough time has elapsed for me to fire another projectile. So we can kind of configure what time that can be, like the time in between projectiles. And because of that, I'm going to create another variable and put it up here so that we can tweak that later.
Another benefit of making it a variable up there, I don't think we'll get to it here, but it's that you can change it later on. So if you want to make an upgrade, you can just say, OK, we'll cut down a little bit of the time between shots.
Yep. All right, so time between fire. This is going to be in milliseconds. And I don't really know what a good value for this is, so I'm just going to put in 100. I should not put in 0 because that would just be the current behavior. Okay. So we've already got a lot of if statements. Well, get ready for one more because we need another one real quick. So this if statement is wrapping all of this, including the set last fire time. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to duplicate this time since start. I'm going to get a logic block and a math block. And I want to say if time since start is greater than the last fire time plus that variable I just created, which the name was time between fire, then we want this code to run again. So in other words, when this gets set to, like, say, 1,000, we fired it at the first second of the game. This will not run again until the time since start is equal to 1,000 plus 100. And then this code will run again. It'll change this last fire time, and it'll keep going like that. It's kind of spacing out our code. You might be tempted to use a pause here, but as we've kind of covered in other streams, putting a pause inside of a game update is a bad idea. It'll just lock your game up because the game update needs to run before the screen can get drawn. All right. There we go. A much more reasonable fire rate. Cool. One thing that I'm seeing that I don't really like, which is if I move to the right, because the player is moving while the projectiles are getting created, it's causing them to kind of bunch up, which looks a little weird. To fix that, what I'm going to do is nothing. It's going to be too much math. I'll fix it later. We'll just leave it as is for now. It's just kind of a little graphical thingy.
I can't remember if they did anything for that. Did they just add it in?
Yeah, so we could just add the player's velocity to the. Actually, you know what? That's not that much.
That works, right? Because of it'll work in either direction.
Yeah.
Oh wait, no.
I just can't remember if they actually did it in old school games like that, or if they let it bunch up.
So we're going to change projectile VX by the player VX, and I think that should do it. Yeah, not just the player.
That'd be kind of cool. We could do that.
It's getting pretty abstract. What does that mean?
Cool. So now we can fire faster if we're moving, but I don't know. Still a little weird.
That seems good. Yeah, I mean, that's how real life works. If you're running forward and you shoot the gun, I think the bullet goes a total speed faster, right?
Yeah, I think that's true.
That's how physics work, I think.
Probably.
If you run and throw a ball versus standing still and throwing a ball.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're on an airplane and the ground is being pulled out from underneath it, does it take off? Yeah, we all know. We've seen Myth. All right. Okay, we've got our player, we've got our basic platformer stuff, and we've got our firing. I think what we want to do now is actually create the boss. So like I said, we're not doing fancy art today. We're just going to be creating a solid colored boss. So my question is, which color in the palette is the most menacing? I'm thinking purple.
Which purple, though? There's a lot of good purples.
The deep purple.
Yeah, so let me go ahead and create a variable for this real quick. We're going to do, you know what, I'm going to make a function for creating the boss. And this isn't really for any particular reason, it's just to make my code a little cleaner. Okay, so create boss over here. And before I forget to, because I always forget, I'm going to call that at the end of onStart so that our boss gets created. All right, zoom back in. Okay, so keeping up with my naming convention, I'm going to rename this to the boss. And the kind, we're going to add a new kind. We'll call this just boss. And we want this to be a big sprite. So I'm thinking maybe it'll be taller than it is wide, just because we're not, we don't have a ton of horizontal space to deal with, and horizontal space is more important than vertical space in a platformer. Okay, so I'll make it 32 wide and then 64 tall, which is pretty tall. That might be too tall. Maybe I'll drop that to like 48. And so I'm thinking this purple. Does this look villainous?
We'll see.
All right, there's our boss. Looks pretty.
Works for me.
And now let's go ahead and move it over to the side of the screen. So I don't know if you guys have any ideas for what the boss behavior should kind of be. So what I was imagining is kind of just like a classic Mega Man style boss, where the player is on the left side of the screen, the boss is on the right side of the screen, and the boss just has its own little behavior patterns over there. Okay, no objections. That's what I'm doing.
No objections.
So I'm going to drag out this set position. I'd already changed it to the boss because I forgot we added that behavior. And I'm going to set this to be like over there. You know what? I'm going to make it a little thinner. So maybe
24.
Yeah. There we go. That looks good. It's a nice big target for us to hit with projectiles, but not so big that you can hit it from anywhere on the screen, right? Kind of can't while it's down here. Okay, so we've got our player, we've got our boss. Let's make the boss actually take damage. And I think that to do this, I'm not going to use the sprite data extension, just because I'm making this a one-player game and it's only going to be one boss. So I can just use a variable. The sprite data extension is really great for when you have a bunch of different sprites that have health and you want to keep track of them on the individual basis. But when you only have one thing that has health, you can just use a variable for that. So I'm going to create a variable called boss health. And we're going to set that in here. And we'll set it to just some arbitrary number, 20.
Oh, okay. I said 1,000, but 20 is more reasonable.
It'll go pretty quick when you're firing right now.
We'll see. Okay, got this. Let's go ahead and add our overlap for this. So we want to have an overlap event between kind boss and kind projectile. So I'm going to drag out our standard overlaps block. I'm going to make this one into projectile. And for the other sprite, we'll do the boss. First thing I want to do is the same thing we do whenever we have a projectile overlap, pretty much. And I want to destroy the projectile. So I'm going to drag out the local variable sprite because I want to get the projectile that's hitting it. If I were to use the projectile variable, I probably wouldn't get the results I want, because that's just pointing to the last projectile that was created. So it might not be the one that's currently hitting the boss. So using this local variable sprite is going to make sure that we always get the right sprite. All right, so now if I fire, they get destroyed when they hit the boss.
Could we add a disintegrate effect on the destroy real quick? I think that might look cool.
I'm gonna have to, okay, let me change this destroy time to be much smaller if we're gonna do that.
Good call, Joey. That looks great.
We should make it smaller though, because I don't, oops.
What? Oh.
Someone filed that bug.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, I like that.
That looks really cool.
All right.
And it keeps with the blocky aesthetic because it's still just a pixel.
Yeah.
The smallest block.
All right. Next thing I want to do is I want to change the boss health. So I'm going to drag out this change boss health. And I want to change it by -1. And for now, just so we can watch this happening, well, I already dragged out a sprite, say. Hooray, past me. And we're going to have the boss say its current health. So let me go ahead and right-click this. Oop, not the list. Create a get boss health and put it inside of the join. There you go.
For next release, we can make that say any, take any, I think. Yeah.
Cool. All right. This is working as expected. So goodbye again, save block. So now we want to actually, I guess, you know what? I'm not going to do the end game stuff yet, just because, no, you know what? I'll do it now. That's probably good. So I'm going to say if the boss health equals 0, then we're going to just call game over win. But we might want to do something fancier later. For now, we'll just call game over win, though. So now this should go pretty quick.
Probably mute.
I don't know, how loud was that?
That was a little loud to me, but maybe the headphones.
Okay. All right, cool. So we could just leave this as is, but just make the boss health way higher. That might be the easiest way to do this. I kind of like the rate at which it's firing right now, and I don't think it really makes that much sense to give the boss invincibility frames, right? Mm-hmm. We're just firing at a constant rate anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that maybe just cranking the boss health up to be much higher. Let's put it at like 100 for now, and then we can kind of see how that feels once we've had the boss actually doing things. Hopefully this takes a bit longer. Yeah, okay. That might be too long, but we'll see once the game actually gets going. And we might want to have our boss have phases. It's a common thing in boss battles where they might like start out with one behavior, and then when their health gets below a certain point, they start doing something else. But for now, let's just go ahead and make our sprite, our boss do anything. So I think the default attack for this boss is just going to be moving up and then down. And when it's either up or down, it's going to fire projectiles at the player to the left. And I want these projectiles to look different than the player projectiles, just to give it a little bit of flavor. So I'm thinking maybe they'll be bigger and a different color. And the reason I want it to be moving up and down is so that the player has to kind of jump up to these platforms when they want to fire, while the guy's up here. So I'm thinking it'll move up, hover for a bit, and just fire. Then move down, hover for a bit, and just fire. And then we can do some more stuff after that.
Sounds good.
Okay, so because this has multiple stages, and I want to kind of control it using timing, I'm actually going to use the forever block instead of on game update. And forever is nice because I can actually use a pause block inside of it without causing my game to hang up, like we mentioned before. So for now, I'm just going to set the initial velocity to be negative, I think. So let me go into sprites, drag out a set velocity, and we're going to set the Vx to be 0. And we're going to set the Vy to be, I'm sorry, positive, so that it's going downwards. So let's go ahead and see that. Cool. So now it's going down to the bottom. All right. So if it's moving downwards and it gets to the bottom, if it hits the wall on the bottom, then what I want it to do is to stop and stay there for a while and then start moving up. Right?
Just,
so I'm gonna
another idea on how maybe we could do these is like we could have like maybe 3 invisible sprites placed around that are like the points that the path that the boss moves between. I don't know if that's simpler than what you had going, but just an idea.
I think that would be a little bit more complicated. just conceptually, because now we'll have sprites that are like invisible markers.
Okay.
Ooh.
Anyway, that might end up being cleaner, but I already thought about it this way, so I'm going to do it this way.
Sounds great.
So I'm going to say, oh, I want a logic block. So I want to say if I want the thing in scene. I want to say if is hitting tile or is hitting wall, is the boss hitting wall bottom, then I want it to set the velocity to be 0. So I'm going to duplicate this set velocity, even though I already created one right over here, and set them both to 0. So now it's just like before, it's just going to go down and stop. So I'm going to create another variable here, and this is going to be called boss is attacking. And my idea is when this happens, I'm going to set is boss attacking to be true. I'm going to pause, and then I'm going to set the velocity to be positive. So the is boss attacking, we're going to handle that code inside of an on-game update. The forever is just going to kind of be keeping track of the bouncing up and down.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's do a pause. And we'll say it's going to pause for 5 seconds. Before this pause happens, though, I want to set that variable to be true. So I'm going to say set boss is attacking. Sorry. I'm going to rename this variable to match with my other booleans, which is boss attacking. And we will set that to be true. And then immediately after the pause, we're going to set it to be false. And I'll handle the velocity thing in a second. All right, so let's drag out another on-game update. There's no real reason for me to drag out another on-game update. I could use the one I already have, but I want the code to be a little cleaner, so I'm going to keep it separated for now. So I'm going to give the boss their own on-game update, where I can just put all the boss-related code. All right. So we're going to go into logic. We're going to drag out an if, and we're going to say if the is boss attacking. Let me zoom in here. Then I want to start creating projectiles. And I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this. Okay. So right now this is set to create projectiles from the player. So I'm going to change that to be the boss.
This will be fun.
Like I said, I want to make the projectile. Yeah, don't worry, I'm going to fix it. I also want to set this projectile to look different. So I'm going to make it purple, different purple though. And if we look right now, our boss is destroying itself because we have an overlap event that happens between projectiles and the boss. So we need to create a new kind for this projectile. But I'm still going to use the projectile block because it gives us some nice stuff with the setting the boss and the initial velocity all in one block, which is kind of neat. Also, I'm leaving this as 0 minus projectile velocity. I'm just going to use the same projectile velocity. If it ends up being something we want to tweak, I can change it later. All right, so let's go into sprites, and I'm going to go down to the bottom here, or not quite the bottom, actually, the bottom of this category, which has a set kind block, right? Nope.
I think it might be have been the very bottom. Yeah, with overlaps.
Right above life cycle. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to set the projectiles kind to, and I'm not going to be creative here. I'm going to go with boss projectile. All right, so now our boss is no longer destroying itself, which is cool. but we should probably make it so that now it actually does the thing I talked about, which is making it so that it bounces up and down. One other thing, though, is that we could also consider doing the timing logic to make it so it's not just a constant stream like it is right now. One idea, though, I had, which it looks really weird to have them all coming from a single point. And also, it's very easy to dodge, especially since I could just do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag out a change block for the projectile. And I want to change the Y, and I'm going to do it by a random amount. So I'm going to drag out a pick random. And how tall was our boss again? Anyone remember?
48, I think.
You can already see the desired effect.
60. Wait, 48?
All right, so I'm going to do
48.
Let's do -16 to +16 and see how. Cool.
Oh man, you get smoked.
Good luck.
Yeah, so this might be a little tough to deal with right now, but I'll fix that in a second. For now, I want to make it so that we finish our boss behavior and it'll actually start turning around. So the reason this is never stopping, by the way, is because it's still hitting the wall bottom when we set this is boss attacking to false. So it's just starting over again. So what we need to do is we need to actually change the velocity when this happens. So I'm going to change the velocity to be, let's say, -50. And I don't know if this will work. We'll see. Nope.
No.
Yeah, because it's still hitting the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing I'm going to need to do is I'm going to change the Y of the boss by -1 so that it's no longer hitting the bottom. And this should... Joey.
Maybe check on the, along with the is hitting wall bottom, like, and.
Oh, no, it did work. I guess 5 seconds is just a much longer time than I thought.
I think it worked after 2 rounds. See, it bumped it up there once, and then it bumped it up again. Why is that? If you put in a pause for like 200 milliseconds, it will do basically the same thing at the end, but it will work. And I will figure out why it's not working like it is now.
All right, cool. Well, that works. So for now, I'm just going to put in the second pause 100.
That's just delaying the next check so that it won't be too close still. Also, I just noticed we had somebody in the chat, so hi, Lush Turnip.
Cool. All right, so now I want to do the same thing, but I want to do it for the other direction. So instead of duplicating this if statement, I'm actually just going to use an or. So now we have, is the boss hitting wall bottom, or is the boss hitting wall top? Then it's going to do this. Right now, though, we're only setting the velocity to be negative. So we also want to make sure that if it's hitting a wall on top, then in this case, we'll make it +50 instead of -50. So let me go ahead and drag out another if statement.
We'll
Do you need
that change by to be in there too.
The change by doesn't need to be there anymore. The pause is handling what the change by, the Y by was supposed to do.
You sure?
Yes.
Instead of setting the velocity to 0, could you just reverse it at the end of this?
Oh, that's true. Yeah, so instead of doing the set velocity to 0, what I can just do is at the bottom, so I don't have to do a second check, I can leave this pause 100, and I can just set the, I'm not going to use the set velocity because I only care about Vy. I'll drag out a set property block, and we're going to set the boss Vy to be 0 minus the boss Vy. Also, you guys might be wondering why we make it 0 minus instead of multiplying by -1. no real reason except that this requires less typing and it's also actually slightly more efficient, but it doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. And the physics will handle running into the wall still? Yeah, it has to do that.
What's going on here, Joey?
I can't explain this one. Oh.
Maybe you did need to see velocity.
Oh, can you print out the velocity? It might be getting zeroed.
Oh,
yeah.
I think we might, yeah, it's zeroing it out because we want the acceleration to apply. Yes.
Okay.
That's kind of annoying.
That's no problem. So we'll go into logic. Basically, what was happening there was because it was hitting the wall, we were setting the velocity to 0 because that's usually what you want to happen, right? It'll be, the velocity will be set, yeah, it'll just be 0 until it gets set again, right?
Yeah. The thing that would not work otherwise is if you were to go, like stand on a wall and then move to the right, you would immediately fall all the way down because the gravity would be compounding over time while you were standing on the wall. So that's why that behavior is there.
Yep. Okay, so if the ball is hitting wall bottom, we want to set the y to be negative. If not, we want to set it to be positive. Set that to 50. And now let's make sure this is working.
I like the 1 second time too.
It might be a little too fast, I think.
Yeah. maybe 2. 5, yeah.
We'll change it to 2 seconds. All right, cool. So now we've got kind of an okay game here going. So we've got a boss. It's moving around, just tricky. It's a little too hard right now though, because the projectiles that are being fired fast and furious by the boss. So I'm going to go ahead and create another variable right here. And I'm not going to put it up here this time. Because I'm putting all the boss stuff over here, I'm going to put it over here. And I'm going to create a variable called time between boss fire. And this is just going to be a little repeat of the code I wrote before for the player. So I think we had 100 for the player. So I'll just try that again. I think we're going to want to tweak it to be different than the player, which is why I made it a separate variable.
Yeah. What if the boss projectiles were bigger and slower?
Yeah, I think we can do that, but I need to finish this first. But then we can do that. I think it's a good idea, though. You're dropping out, by the way, Daryl.
Sorry, Wi-Fi.
Okay, so I'm going to create another variable, which is time since last boss. Could be base fire, but so I'm going to put this right here. We're going to go into game and drag out this time since start, which might be weird to say, but is one of my favorite blocks inside of Arcade, just because it lets you do cool stuff like this. But it's one that doesn't get a lot of attention. So we're going to set the time since last boss fire to time since start, and I'm just going to duplicate this check because we're doing the same thing. So if time since start is greater than last fire time, it should be last fire boss.
Time.
Well, what did I call this? Okay, wait. Yeah.
Time since last boss fire.
Okay, wait. So I called it
last boss fire time.
Yeah. All right. So we'll change this to last boss fire time plus time between boss fire. And now it should be a little more reasonable. All right. That fire rate seems okay to me, but I think it'll work much better once we make the projectiles slower, like Daryl mentioned. So let's go ahead and tweak this projectile speed that we've got. So I'm going to go into this create projectile right here. We're using the projectile velocity right now. And because we're running low on time, I'm just going to hard code it. So let's go ahead and change it to -50, right? That's might be interesting. What is happening?
I think it's doing the weird behavior where if you delete everything, it goes to 0 because it's invalid.
Okay. All right, that is much more difficult by making it slower. So let's try -75, I think.
I feel like a slower time between would be good, but
you can queue up quite a few attacks before the phase starts. So I guess that's when you want to make your attack.
Yeah. All right, we should tweak all of these things. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and do the final part of the game, which is the player taking damage. So we're going to go into info and drag out our set player lives block, or just set life to. Let's go up to on start. And we'll set the life to be like 10. I don't know. And now let's go ahead and add our overlap. So I'm going to duplicate this. We want basically the same thing. This is grayed out because it's the same as my other event. But as soon as I change this projectile kind to boss projectile, it'll pop back into color. And instead of boss, I want this to be player. So we're going to destroy this with disintegrate, just like before. See that happening. But instead of this boss health logic, we're just going to change the life by -1. We don't need to do a game over because that's automatically built into the info blocks. So now if I jump up and hit it, there we go, got game over. Okay. Well, we've got about 10 minutes left. So first thing that I'm thinking is it was pretty dumb of me to make it so that you fire in the last direction you went when you really always want to fire to the right. Oh, whoops, hit the simulator collapse button. But I'm just going to leave that as is for now. We could theoretically have moved these platforms over and then had the boss switch sides at some point. That would have been cool.
Yeah, I think it does make sense for like a full game because when you're not just in the boss zone, you'll want that behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And also it makes it a little harder because you have to be conscious of which direction you're facing.
Yeah. Well, future bosses can have different behavior too. So
that's true. We could use the same kind of base game for our future bosses and just have new mechanics for the bosses.
Yeah.
We haven't really...
Yeah.
Oh.
I think that'd be cool.
Okay, cool. Yeah. All right, this is pretty difficult. If we had more time, I would probably spend some time tweaking this, but I want to get a little bit more of interesting stuff going on. Specifically, I want the boss behaviors to change once its life is below a certain amount. So what I'm thinking is we have a few different things we can do. I think it would take a little bit too much time to just make it a whole different attack, but we do have some values we can tweak. For example, we can tweak the amount of time that it spends firing. We can make it so it just switches much more quickly. And we could also change this velocity too, so that it's moving faster up and down, make it harder for the player to dodge and catch. You know what, I'm going to start with that. And then we can kind of figure out some other stuff if we have time left.
If we have time, we could even make it fire while it's moving when it's just about to lose. That's going to be very challenging, though.
Yeah.
Gameplay-wise, that'll be very challenging. Code-wise, it's probably not that bad.
Yeah, no, code-wise is pretty easy, but it would be very challenging in terms of gameplay. I think this game might already be too hard. So I think we're going to do time between move. Time between boss move. And right now it's at 2 seconds, so I'm going to leave it at that. And let me go ahead and use that variable down here in my pause. So drag out the time between boss move, put it right there. And let's say if the boss life is less than half, so right now it's at 100, I'm going to say if it's at 50 or lower. So I'll put that in this code right here. I'm going to do an else if. I'll do boss health equals 50. Then I'm going to change that variable. So I'll change time between boss moves by, well, let's not use change. Let's just use set. Set time between boss move to be 1 second. And we'll see how this goes. All right, so now I'm going to have to do some damage.
I feel like this actually might make it a little bit easier because the duration that that's not moving is the time that you're vulnerable.
Yeah, so you can see it's switching now faster. So that code worked, great. But I think Joey's point is completely correct. So the other thing I want to change is I want to change the speed at which it moves up and down. So I'm going to create another variable because I just hard-coded this before, and this is going to be boss speed. And right now the boss speed is 50. So in addition to setting this time between boss move to be half, I'm going to set the boss speed to be twice as much. And this is going to be possibly comically difficult. Okay. So let me go to where I'm actually using the boss speed, or where I should be using the boss speed.
In the forever.
Yeah. So for this one, I'm just going to use the boss speed directly. And then for this one, I'm going to do my 0 minus the boss speed. All right. Now I'm going to play a second, and hopefully I can do that amount of damage.
Oh.
All right, well, that worked.
Got toasted.
All right. Let me think. Is there anything else I want to do real quick before we finish up? First, we should come up with a name for this boss number 1. And I think the names for these games should be just be names for the bosses. So does anyone have a fun name for the boss? It does not need to be descriptive of what it looks like.
Albert's Revenge.
What?
Revenge.
Just revenge?
We just heard revenge. You're like,
Oh, I said Albert.
Somebody really doesn't want us to hear that first word.
The name? What did you?
Albert.
Write it down on a piece of paper and hold it up to the camera.
Albert?
A long time.
Was it Albert? I could have heard Albert. Chandler.
I put it in the chat.
Yeah, Albert.
Okay.
I feel like Daryl has put so much work into communicating this name that we have to use it now.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do 34th stream, by the way.
It's not a good name.
So we no longer have to spell out the word.
Oh, thank you so much. It's also easier to read because it's not a million characters long.
And I'm going to just name this one Versus Albert. And yeah, I think that's about it. So I got to say, this is kind of a fun game we ended up making here. But I think that
I like it.
if we had had a little bit more time, we could have probably done some more stuff. Hopefully, we'll be able to gloss over some of this in the future streams if we kind of use this as a base game. So we'll be able to get some more complicated bosses as we go on. All right. Well, that's it for us today. I'm Richard, at Richard on the MakeCode forum.
I'm Daryl, at Darzu on the forum.
I'm Joey, at JWonderl on the forum.
I'm Shannon, at Shakao on the forum.
And thanks for tuning in. And as always, check out the forum. And if you have any feedback or names for bosses or particular mechanics that you would like to see, go ahead and post them there. We try to keep an eye on that. So see you later.